everybody, my name is Wood. Today I read Southern Plantations. Most of the people who live in South own farms. The South has a long growing season. This made it easier for farmers to grow food. This made it possible to have a cash crop, meaning they could sell their crops for money. Soon, the farm grew into plantations. A plantation was about the size of 100 small farms. For some of the plantations, the cash crops was tobacco. Others grew rice or indigo. To grow these crops, owners and farmers needed a lot of workers. Sometimes they had as many as 50 to 100 workers. Many of these workers at the time were indentured servants. They were working to pay up their passage to America. But soon these workers were replaced with slaves. Slaves were cheaper. Slaves were easier to control. Slavery's rose became a huge issue in the South for many years to come. Women's right. For years and years, women have been fighting for many rights. Women were not treated equally to men. Laws were in place that did not allow women to vote. After years of work, things were slowly changing. More and more women were finishing high school and going to college. By 19,000s, laws were being passed that allowed women to own property. There were still needed changes. For example, jobs were divided into women's works and men's works. Women weren't allowed to have certain jobs, and they were still they needed the right to vote. Many women leaders worked to bring this right to all women. These women held marches demanding the right to vote. They wrote letters and made speeches to the nation's leaders. Finally, in 1920, all adult women were given the right to vote. This was the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. The Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl is a term used to describe a religion that suffered from drought and dust storm during the Great Depression. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s lasted for about a decade. It was one of the most trying times in the history of the nation. Families struggled to survive during this time. The Dust Bowl actually caused the Depression to last longer. The Dust Bowl was located along the southern plains. Oklahoma, Kansas, and parts of Texas. New Mexico and Colorado made up the Dust Bowl. Drought took away the rains and the water. The land was left dry and parched. The wind came and blew the dust around. The blowing dust made it difficult to do even simple things. It was hard to breathe, eat, and sleep with all the dust. People got sick from all the dust. Farmers were not able to grow crops. Fruits and waters were scared. Sometimes the dust storms were so bad that they were more like dust blizzards. One day was called Black Sunday. On the Sunday, the worst dust blizzard happened. It caused a lot of damage. The rain did not come until 1939. Leisure time in America. In the early 18th, Americans spent their whole day working. Sunday was the only day off, and the only vacation days were Christmas, New Year's Day, and the 4th of July. People worked around 66 hours a week, which means about 11 hours a day were spent at work. By the 1950s, time has changed. People work only 40 hours a week. The number of work hours per day was less, and most people had Saturday and Sunday off each week. Most money were also given 2 weeks of vacation time each year. People had lots more free times. I have a dream. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist minister. He lived in the 1950s and noticed that equality among people did not exist. People of color were discriminated against and treated very poorly. During this time period, the Supreme Court ruled on the case Brown v. Board of Education. This case was about ending segregation in public schools. King fought for civil rights for all people. He made many speeches and marched in protests. He was trying to get the government to allow freedom to all people. King was eventually arrested and thrown into jails. When he got out, he organized a march in Washington, D.C. On the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he delivered his most famous speech. This speech talked about his dream that one day all children could sit and work together, regardless of the color of their skin. His speech also talk about all Americans deserving the same rights. Thousands of people heard his speech. This speech helps lead to laws like the Civil Rights Act. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was and still is an inspiration to many.